And so we are very fortunate to have all four of these wonderful men who are doing ministry in Israel among Jews and among Arabs. And so I'm going to begin with Michael. And and this question is for all of you. If I asked you to describe your ministry in Israel briefly, how would you describe it?
Briefly, you mean 15 minutes? You know, by the way, I'm incarnation of Aries Seraph, so you see.
The Russian version.
Well, you know, the Elijah, Jesus, Aries Seraph, Michael Zin, that's just parallels. Like. Anyhow, how I would describe our ministry. We are just completely legal ministry, and in our file on our registration in the Ministry of Interior, it's written, the black on white, the Chosen People Ministry, Beit Sar Shalom, House of Prince of Peace, exists in Israel for the purpose of bringing good news of Jesus Christ to Jewish people, period, signed by Ministry of Interior or something like that. So if you ask me, you know, what are we doing? We are sharing good news with the Jewish people in Jewish land and sometimes even in Jewish language. What does it mean for me personally and for ministry? I have a privilege to lead in Israel, to share good news. It's just to share His love, unconditional love, and to give to the people hope that they don't have in their daily life. In my philosophy of ministry, you cannot separate evangelism from life. If you want, your life is a reflection of evangelism, and evangelism is to be continuation of your life. You cannot consider these two subjects separated. It's just 10 to 4, I'm evangelist, and then what? So that's reflected in what we do. It might be evangelism campaign proper, conferences, sharing books, Bible studies, congregations, sharing food, camps for children, camps for soldiers, you know, the studies of the English language, opening new Messianic centers in Jerusalem and in Ramat Gan. Whatever we do, you know, just with the mind, you know, that it is done because Jesus loves you, okay? It's not either deeds or faith. It's not legitimate even question. You do because you believe, okay? And your faith is revealed by your words and / or by your deeds. By the way, the word davar, meaning deed, and meaning word, it's the same word in Hebrew language. So in Hebrew mind, you cannot separate your life from your message. That's very, very, very important, and that's exactly the way Jewish people take it. Are we successful? I don't know, depending how do you measure your success. It's just I mentioned another day, we are not for the numbers here. We are for souls. And we are not saviors, praise the Lord. We are planters. And our task here is to plant this seed, okay? And then whatever God really just sees and how God sees them, that's just His business, not of mine. So that's basically what we do.
Good. Thank you, Michael. Joel, you know, most people here know you as the writer, but explain to us the Joshua Fund and how that is working itself in Israel, meeting your mission statement.
Sure. Well, so in 2006, my wife, Lynn, and I founded this ministry called the Joshua Fund. The mission statement is to educate and mobilize Christians to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus, according to the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3. And now that composes several pieces. One, part of our ministry is to the church, right? To educate and mobilize Christians. To do what? To bless Israel. Okay, so what does bless mean? And so certainly means to bring the gospel to our people who didn't know, don't get it. It means feeding the poor, caring for widows and orphans, and providing a humanitarian relief component to what we do. And of course, it also means to bless. Means as Jesus says, Yeshua says, as a Jew in the land, as the Messiah of our people, that He will build His church. So our job is to come alongside, we believe, and strengthen what God is doing among the pastors and the ministry leaders to reach their people, to care for the poor. We don't, and it's to bless Israel and her neighbors. We believe Yeshua said, we know it, love your neighbor, love your enemies. So the question is, well, how do we do that? How do we make that part of the ministry? About 80% of what we do is focused on the Jewish people of Israel, but about 20% of what we do is focused on Palestinians and Lebanese and Egyptians and Syrians and Iraqis and who did I miss? The Jordanians. So 5 Arab countries that surround us. Because we believe we're supposed to model this in response to Jesus' command and to what He modeled. And that goes back to the church at large, that we see the church all too often being in an either-or mode. People tend to be very excited about what God's doing with Israel and then completely dismissive, sometimes even hostile and unkind in the way they speak of or about Palestinians or Muslims or Arab neighbors. Or they're all about the Palestinians and the Arabs, and they are quite critical, unfairly, unkindly, unlovingly so, about the apartheid, colonialist, imperialist Zionists who are just ruining it for everybody else. So those are extremes, but we see this play itself out, and we believe it's not either or, it's both and it's not just, we need to model this in substance, but also in tone. And that's a big part of what we do. And we believe it's supposed to be in the name of Jesus. We put that right in the mission statement, so there's no doubt who we are and why we exist. And we do it according to the Abrahamic covenant, because those foundational promises that God made, He will keep them. And because inherent in the promises is to not just bless Israel, although that's big. But also that every family on the earth will be blessed through Abraham. Operationally, I'll just say this without going into more detail, but we think of ourselves like a venture capital fund, meaning as people donate tax-deductible money to the Joshua Fund in North America, for example, we hire, train, and deploy staff to go into Israel and the Arab countries and get to know ministries. Our coffee budget is very, very high, that line. I sit with brothers and sisters, listen to them, try to understand what they're doing. It's growing so much over time that it's really quite, it's a lot of coffee that takes a lot of time. But, and then certainly pray for, encourage, make connections for ministries if we can, and if the Lord gives us a green light to financially invest, and not just in the Israel ministries, but also in the Arab ministries. So so our side is a venture capital approach, which is, if you saw young, companies that they had a good product, they had a good staff, there was a sense of real mission, but they needed resources, and they could really have more impact in the marketplace. If you were a VC, you'd invest, and that's what we do. Now, from the donor perspective, maybe it's better to think of it as a mutual fund, because from your perspective, I want you to support CPM because that's why we're here. But just so, let's pretend you weren't here for CPM and you were just generally trying to figure out, well, who would I get involved, and IMB, how would I know who to help, right? I have a heart, but I don't know who these ministry leaders are. I don't know if they're theologically on track. I don't know if their financial books make sense. I don't know. So how do I know where to send my check? And so the Joshua Fund becomes a mutual fund where if you're donating to us, we go figure that out. And if you trust us, then we'll go, invest in ministries that we believe God is giving us the freedom to assist. And we consider it a tremendous joy. And so all that to sum up, it's not so much that we are the doing ministry in the land. There's some, and now that we're there, some of that. But mostly it's a partnership, it's a coming alongside, investing in allies that God has already planted and are doing it in the local languages and bearing wonderful fruit. And Chosen People Ministries is a wonderful and trusted partner there. So.
Great, thanks, Joel. Ephraim, did you all hear Mitch share his testimony about his friend Ephraim, the crazy teenager strung out on drugs? Well, that's him. But Ephraim,
Cleaned up well.
Yeah, Ephraim was part of Mitch's testimony coming to faith in Yeshua. Ephraim, you've been in the land for a long time, only recently under the umbrella of Chosen People Ministries. Can you describe, again, like I said to Michael, just a basic description of your day-to-day activity of ministry in Israel?
Yeah. First, I have to say Mitch was a bad influence on me, so much so that I desperately needed salvation to get away from his bad influence. And if you don't believe me, you could have asked my mother. She didn't like that kid, but he's done good. My wife and I, Jeannie, we've been in ministry to the Jewish people for 40 years. 25 years we've been in Israel. 20 of those years we were in Tel Aviv. And in Tel Aviv, my heart, my pulse was to how to reach that dynamic young population of Tel Aviv. And we did a lot of projects and outreaches, experimenting with all kinds of things, how to tap into that vibrant spirit in Tel Aviv with all of the young people. I even met and shared with a fellow who was leading up the Legalize Marijuana in Israel campaign. We didn't share the product, but we did share some ideas. Well, maybe, anyhow, we won't. And so that, our ministry is moving along there in Tel Aviv. And then 5 years ago, my ministry situation changed. And a congregation up in Nahariya, which is in Western Galilee, called me and asked if we could come and help pastor the congregation. They had gone through a terrible split. And after praying it, we felt a calling from the Lord. And my wife and I moved up to Nahariya. And I should have been more aware of it. But Nahariya in Western Galilee and Upper Galilee in general is at least 40% or maybe 60% Arab. And the Jewish and Arab communities live together seamlessly. It's not politicized. We work together. We share together. And in the congregation that I was now pastoring, there were Israelis, Holocaust survivors, Arabs, Lebanese folks who came out of Lebanon in 2000 with the help of the Israeli government, and some other Europeans. And all of a sudden, after all of these years of a mindset of, I'm out to reach my Jewish people in Israel, I realized that I'm out to reach my community, which is Jews and Arabs. And an interesting demographic is, in Galilee, by the year 2025, the Arab population will be predominantly Muslim. And as a heart for the Lord and a heart for my Jewish people, I'm saying, Lord, how are we going to accomplish this? And one of the ways that we're doing is building relationships, strategic partnerships with a lot of the Arab congregations up in Western Galilee. Now, what the Arab congregations and the Messianic congregations have in common is we're small and we don't have a lot of resources. In my congregation are widows and some elderly people and immigrants. And in the Arab congregations, the pastors are bivocational. And, you know, these are pastors who I've known for years. Some of the pastors now have been studying at Israel College of the Bible in the master's degree program. And I feel the time is ripe to move ahead to form some partnerships to say we need to work together. The other thing is the congregations, Messianic and Arab congregations in Western Galilee, are neglected. It's just not as snazzy as going to Jerusalem, to our Chosen People Jerusalem Center, or to Tel Aviv, Barely do mission groups get past Haifa. And so one of the things we try to do is invite people who are interested in short-term missions to come up to the Galilee and work together with the Arab congregations and the Messianic. In our fellowship, we partnered, not just partnered, we unified with a Lebanese congregation. They're Arab-speaking. Some of the people in the Lebanese community are also Muslim, but in our fellowship, obviously, it's Christians, believers in Jesus, and we partnered together. And so we have the unique opportunity that my friend and partner is Lebanese Arab and can speak to Muslims, can speak to Arabs, and we're trying to develop initiatives all along ministering to my Jewish people as well. And we're kind of heading up and overseeing, my wife is the Isaiah 53 campaign. And since September 23rd, we've gotten over 1,000 responses. And some of the follow-up was coming out of Jerusalem, but they were overwhelmed. So now in Nahariya, we're filling the orders. My home has become like a mail order house. You ought to come and visit, Michael.
Well, it's because they weren't raptured on September 23rd, so they needed to figure out why.
And so this is what we're trying to do up in Western Galilee.
Great, great. Thank you, Ephraim. Herbie Geer is the IMB, well, I'll call him the Jewish Macha, the one in charge of Jewish missions literally around the world. But you're still based in Israel primarily. So explain what you're doing besides overseeing all of the Jewish missions around the world, but what you're doing specifically in Israel, especially with the Baptist Village and what the Baptist Village does among Jews and Arabs.
Sure. Baptists have been in Israel since 1911. It began to work. And the Lord has worked through many, many people. Many Baptists have come and sweat and given their life to minister to the peoples of Israel, both the Arab people, the Muslims, the Druze, the Jews, the Bedouin of Israel, in many, many different ways. Our work with personally has been there for the last 30 years. I came from Alabama. My wife came from Canada. We met in Israel. And so the Lord has made all three of our kids grew up in Israel. It's a very, very special place for us. Among the Arab work, you have a school. I mean, it's a lot of different works we could talk about. There's a school in Nazareth, the Baptist school there. It's one of the top 10 schools in Israel every year. So a high degree of excellence, a high degree of helping to prepare people to be thinkers and educators and to understand better how to approach the world. Educationally, we have set up an independent company that brought in a full-size model of the tabernacle that stands in the desert of Israel where it stood 3,400 years ago to help make the connections both for Christians and for Jews of understanding the connection between the Old Testament and the New Testament and understanding that many times really to understand the footsteps of Jesus, we need to walk in the footsteps of Moses and really bringing that all to light. In addition, we have the prayer center in Jerusalem that stands right on the seam line between East and West Jerusalem. It was a house that was owned by the Spaffords at one time that wrote the song, "It Is Well With My Soul." It was part of the American colony. And it's a place where we can come and pray for all the nations. And from there, we're looking at the Mea Shearim on the Jewish side and pray for them. You have the Muslims on this side. You have Arab Christians on this side. And so we get to pray for all people groups because we know Jesus' strategy is Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the outermost parts of the world. And as we bring people in, we say, okay, you're in Jerusalem. So now what part of the Great Commission belongs to you? And so we're able to challenge people that way. In the coastal plain, we have the Baptist Village that was supposed to be a believing kibbutz at first. It never really went that way. But there were many orphans after the War of 48. So it was an orphanage. Once the orphans grew up and they went to school and they graduated and they moved out, it's become our camp and conference center. but it's also part of what we do to minister to the larger body. We have baseball and softball there. It's a good Jewish pastime, right? And so it's an amazing place because the baseball this last year, the baseball for the Maccabea teams, that's the Jewish Olympics, was at Baptist Village. Okay? There was a professional league in Israel one year. That home league was at Baptist Village. So we're able to be part of the community because we've been as part of the community before even Israel was a nation. As part of that, we get to see what God is doing through a messianic movement. All of y'all saw the statistics that Erez brought today? Isn't it exciting? And we've seen it when we knew everybody in 87 when we first came. You knew everybody, all the believers in Israel, to now it's hard to know any. I mean, you just know a very small percentage. So it's an exciting day we live in. And we get to see God moving among many, many different people. And one thing I would say, how many of you are Texas A&M fans? Okay. UT? Okay. Alabama? Auburn? Okay. Well, I went to Alabama. My son went to Auburn. Okay, he's in the back there. This isn't about choosing football teams. These are about real people, real life, and real truth. We cannot afford to choose teams like we choose football teams. This is a gospel once and for all the people groups, and we can't lose sight of that.
Thanks, Herbie. Here's a question that is on my mind. With a constant threat of annihilation and at least warfare always on the minds of Israelis, when you develop relationships with individual Israeli families, does that ever come up in conversation? Is that something that Israelis are thinking about all the time, or it's just something that they've gotten kind of callous to? I'll start with you, Michael.
My daughter just finished a service in IDF a month and a half ago, and I remember the very second month of her service, she was patrolling with another girl like her in the nighttime, something in the north. So you can understand what do I feel about my 18-year-old baby with this gun bigger than she is, been in the nighttime. So suddenly, at 3 o'clock a.m., I got a call. I don't know what about you, but when I got the calls at 3 a.m., I don't like it. Because it should be something serious, right? And I pick up immediately, and my daughter, Daddy, I don't know what to do. We are now in patrol, and a group of Arabs approaching us. 3 o'clock a.m., here I am in Jerusalem. She is 150 miles from me in the north, and I'm supposed to give her answer. What do I have to answer here? Shoot? Stay where they are? I mean, what? And I say, call to your commander immediately. Like, Israeli army, welcome, And she says, wow, he's coming. God, wow, such release. How long can I survive getting calls every night? Not long, right? So I have either to recall my daughter from the army or to use the situation. And I believe the most of Israelis, after so many years, does it affect their life? Of course it does. Do they think time to time about danger? Yes, they do. Do they want this peace? Absolutely. I don't know one single, in clear mind, Israeli family that is looking just to fight for war. But if you ask me in a daily life, I live in a downtown of Jerusalem, right? In the downtown of Jerusalem. And here and there are terror attacks have been in the past, and we see the fighting. And but I have to tell you, Israelis, even non-believers, even non-believers, even atheists. As Ben-Gurion said, the first prime minister, if you live in Israel and you don't believe in God, you are not a realistic man. You have to believe in miracle. And Israel, unfortunately, takes these miracles for granted for a while. For good, it works. They're quiet and they're very happy. I don't know, there's recent researches but Israelis were 7th or 8th, the most happiest nations in the world. And they live longer than Americans. Surprise. Why is that? Because deep down, I believe, even atheists, they somehow believe that God is on our side. So that's where we are about that.
Thanks. Anybody else want to deal with that question? Basically, the constant threat of attack, how does that impact your relationships?
Well, the coping mechanism that people in Israel have developed is just incredible. The fact that all of our children serve in the army, all of the men, the husbands and wives have served in the army, and we've just incorporated a coping mechanism, hoping that you never get a call at 2 or 3 a.m. But like, for example, when I moved to my city in Nahariya, which is 6 miles from Lebanon, and it was 2012, and there was a war going on in Gaza, and they said it may come to the north, Hezbollah may. So I just moved into a new apartment, and in every home that's built after 1990, you have to have a bomb shelter, a safety room. And so I look in my safety room, and the metal shutters don't close. They're kind of rusted and old, not old, but they couldn't close. So I asked my landlord, I said, Chaim, there may be trouble up here. I'd like to be able to close my shutters. And he laughs at me. He says, what's your problem? And his son says, what's the matter? You're afraid? And I thought, isn't that a reasonable thing to be able to close the bomb shutters? In other words, they didn't think of it. When it comes, if there's air raid, if there's bombs falling, you'll close the shutters. But that's not today. It's a coping mindset. I find some of the tension, I don't know, Joel and Herbie, on the highways. I find when there's something happening politically, the drivers get mad. It's like, we're not going to wait for a terror bomb. We're going to try to kill you on the highway. And I've noticed this over the years, that bad driving has a political level behind it, but I can't prove it.
No, I don't think I've seen that. I just seen this all the time. So, that is really the most fearful place in Israel is the highways, to be quite honest. More people are killed on the highways than in any of the wars, and I think you just need to be aware of that when you come in. And that's really where the real fear is. There's something about bombs and bullets, though. During the Lebanese war that we had a while back, a number of different things happened that really helped me understand what was going on. First, if you had not looked at news and you weren't living Haifa or north of Haifa, where the missiles were landing in Israel, and you didn't know anybody going to the army, if you were just got off the plane and got on the road, you would not have known there was a war. It was life as normal. And that's what Israel does. They keep life as normal no matter what. As normal as possible, you keep life as normal. So I picked up some of our dignitaries who were coming in that time. They were supposed to be helping us to de-stress, so I wanted to help them to understand the situation. So I said, okay, here's the situation. There's missiles falling in the north of the country coming in from Lebanon. There's missiles in the south of the country coming in from Gaza. Ahmadinejad has just said he's going to wipe Israel off the face of the map. And by the way, we're driving through the Valley of Armageddon. That is the humor you have in Israel. You deal with it, you laugh about it, you make life as normal as possible. And so my sister called and said, didn't the missile land close to you? I said, Jenny, it hit out in the sea, and it was 25 kilometers from us. It wasn't even close. She said, Herbie, it's a missile. I said, but that's not close. So you kind of get used to, and you're dealing with this thing, and it gets to be very surreal sometime, I think. But Israelis deal with it, and that's from the very inception, from the War of Independence, through everything, all the wars, even during the War of Independence when they had no food in the shops, and there was a war going around, the shopkeepers in Jerusalem still went and sat in their shops. Because you can't allow fear or terrorism to steal your life.
Yeah, go ahead, Joel.
Just as more of a newcomer, though, I think there. Can you hear me? No, I'm just kidding. I wasn't speaking it. Okay, I'll use this one. All right. So I'm a little bit newer to this than these guys have all been there, 30-some years. I think I see a contradiction. I see on the one hand, there is a resilience, in part because it just has happened so much over so long that things that would freak out and bring America to a halt don't. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't affect people. And I think there's like a low hum constantly of sort of an existentialism that I think it's hard to pinpoint it, but I think it does affect the openness to discuss faith issues at one level. I think it's why Jews are looking for love in all the wrong places. They are looking for spiritual connection in other things, because in a sense they do know that people hate them and are trying to kill them. But the resilience level is high. I'll give you an example. I was before we moved, I was there, and I was meeting with some Arab pastors to tie this thing together. And we were meeting with them at a restaurant in Jerusalem. And suddenly, it was a rocket war was going off. But again, day to day, everybody is watching and listening to the news. So, but if you didn't, of course, that'd be good. I tell people they should go through Fox detox here in this country too, because if you pay attention too closely, it can affect your blood pressure and your sanity and your sanctification. But anyway, in Israel, here we are with these Arab brothers, and suddenly the sirens go off, and that means that's a missile coming towards Jerusalem. We all jump up, and we say, where's your bomb shelter? And the Arab waiter goes, we don't have a bomb shelter. So, well, where do you go when the missiles are coming? I don't know, we've never had any missiles coming here. Where should we go? Let me just be more precise. There's no place to go. So I looked at the Arab pastors, and we all sat down, we ordered cappuccinos. Now, one other piece about this is the way God has blessed Israel's defense forces and the technology is actually making Israel safer because of these rockets. So now there are systems to shoot down the rockets. And those systems only fire if the computer figures out that the rocket not only is inbound, but will hit a population, literally a place of where people would be. If it's a field, they don't shoot back. If it's the sea, they won't shoot at it. And this is shooting down 90% of the rockets that it fires at. But I was having lunch during a rocket war in the most southern town. You could see Gaza. We'd gone down with the Joshua Fund team to meet with a hospital where we buy neonatal, equipment for their the children, the babies, and just to see how they were doing with all this tension and everything. So it happened to be a quiet afternoon. It had been a few hours, no rockets. Okay, they're like, oh, this is going well. Let's go for lunch. We said, okay. So they take us to a fish restaurant right on the harbor. And the director of public affairs for the hospital says, Joel, you sit there, because right behind me, that's Gaza. So if there are rockets, you'll be able to see them. And I said, look, I have YouTube. I don't really need to see them. But anyway, we sat down. So we ordered fish, and we're having a lovely time. And suddenly the sirens go off. But just a split second before the sirens, I can see 4 rockets coming up over this woman's head. Now that is surreal. So now the sirens go off, and everybody's running for the bomb shelter. But the chairman at the time of the Joshua Fund, and me, I was the president at the time, we whip out our phones, and we're going, this is interesting. Now, we are backing towards the shelter, but then we hear the Iron Dome go off, and you can watch these things zigzag through the air to find their targets. And right at that moment, as we're transfixed with our phones, somebody shouts out from the bomb shelter, The only people that have died in this war are the moron husbands that put their wives and children in the bomb shelter and then stand outside to watch. Now get in here. So we got in there. But you get opportunities in the bomb shelter then to have a conversation about the Lord and life and death. So it's a mix.
So it gives open doors. We're going to give them an opportunity to ask you guys some questions, but before we do, beginning with you, Herbie, just briefly, some prayer requests that people can be praying for your ministry in Israel.
I think one of the things that we fail to realize that God is motivated by the cry of his people. That's what motivated him to bring Israel out of Egypt. And all of us have mothers and fathers and sisters or uncles or aunts or somebody that has prayed for them. But the Jewish people don't know they need to cry out, so who would cry out for them? And the Muslim people don't have an aunt or an uncle or brother or sister to pray for them. So if the church will not cry out, then why would God move? Because he has chosen in his infinite wisdom to work through the prayers of his people. So I would say, instead of getting angry when you catch the red light, just cry out and say, Lord, would you say the traditional Judaism that has held Israel captive, would you say to that Judaism, let my people go that they may serve me? And when you say to Islam that has held the Muslim people captive, would you say to that Islam, let my people go that they may serve me? And that we would cry out to God at every time we stop. Instead of thinking through our do list would be to cry out.
Thank you, Herbie. Ephraim?
I would like to ask prayer that we can do more in Western Galilee, reaching out to Jews and Arabs with the partnership of the Arab congregation, the Messianic congregations. And also in Nahariya, I just saw an article in the paper today that our hospital in Nahariya and the nearby hospital is taking in more wounded Syrians, women and children and combatants. And I have been for more than a year trying to find a way to get into the hospitals to bring care packages to these wounded Syrians. It requires cooperation with Arab speakers, and I'm just praying that the Lord will open up a legitimate door, because we need approval from the hospital administrators, and the wounded people are Syrian Muslims, and you need a sensitivity. But you know, they're coming right to our hospitals, and I want to bring a word of greeting in the name of the Lord. Peace be upon you.
Amen.
Okay, Ephraim. Joel?
Well, one of the joys that the Joshua Fund has is that next month will be the 6th year that we have done an annual retreat for pastors and their wives in Israel, but also in the West Bank. So it's 2 different retreats, but we invite Israeli pastors and ministry leaders and their wives, both Jewish and Arab pastors and ministry leaders, and we just take them away for a few days of R&R. It's a time of worship, it's a time of prayer, it's a time of studying the scriptures. We bring in a group of pastors from the U.S., not name brand people, wonderful dear brothers from small congregations who just really relate well, and they're good, solid Bible teachers, and they really love the people. They're not trying to be the show, they're trying to just serve and encourage. And the first year we went through Titus, verse by verse, the whole book. And then the next year was James. Next year was 1 Thessalonians. And the last 2 years has been 4 chapters each year of Acts. And this year will be Acts 9 through 12. And it's just a wonderful time of encouragement or refreshment. They have no responsibilities. They don't have anything. And sometimes, I talk to these guys and they will tell me sometimes it's the first time in years where they've been able to take their wife away just to take a break from everything. And so we do that with the Jewish and Arab Israelis, but then we do the same conference a few days later in the West Bank. And this year, it is really scaled up. They didn't trust us much at first. And the first year happened to be during a rocket war, so that may have tamped down some of the people that wanted to come. But we had about 40, maybe 20 couples the first year. And this year, there'll be over 120 people there. That is between 95 and 97% of every Palestinian pastor or ministry leader that there is will be coming to the conference, which means not only is that we're blessed to bless, but also that there's a trust level growing. And it's not really with the team, it's with me. You know, they at first they think, you're Jewish, you're Zionist, you work for Netanyahu, okay, you're a believer, but why would I want to spend time with you? I mean, you're sort of the poster child of what I don't want to be around. But that is changing because they see that we love them and we just want to refresh and encourage them. And I believe that is helping build, or not build, nudge a little bit of unity, a little bit of sweetness between the bodies, and that's what we're trying to do. So that'll be next month, the 6th annual one, and appreciate your prayers. And that my wife and I now, as citizens, we need an actual permit from the IDF for the last 2 years to get into the West Bank city where it will be held, because we're not legally allowed to go otherwise. The first year they did not give us the permit. Last year they did. So we pray that we can get in and be with the very brothers and sisters that we have pulled the organization together for.
Thank you. And Michael.
Oh, two things. One is personal. As I told you, my daughter just finished army. And for God to show her the ways. And our adopted daughter is about to start army in 1 month. So just we go with the children like that. That's on the personal. And the ministerial. To pray about all our ministries, we got but specifically about 2 edges of our ministry, the children and the Holocaust survivors. The first group, children, they have too many choices. The last group has too little of the choices. And while first one, children, they just begin their life and can be influenced by all sorts of weird stuff, it's very important to put them in the proper direction of huge importance this ministry. While the elderly people, they're just about to finish their life, yes, and still not knowing God, huge sense of urgency, either now or never for them. Both groups require from us patience and love. And that's very, very specific ministries I would love you to pray about.
Okay. So we'll do something a little different. Can I have 2 different people pray for these requests? And short, quick prayers. Anyone wanting to pray? Go ahead. Amen. Thank you, my dear. Beautiful prayer. Well, why don't we have about 10 minutes, so I'll get down and let you ask your questions. Who has a question? And just say who it is for. Let's try to get people who haven't asked questions before, okay? Yes.
Okay, for anybody, but do you guys know of any ministries that have tried to reach out to Arab communities outside of Israel? Like in Dallas, there's an Arab pastor in the church that I recently met with, and I go to a Messianic Jewish congregation, but I want to try to create bridges between the Arab and Jewish communities in Dallas and other areas too. So I wonder if, do you know of any outside of Israel?
Yes, I mean, our organizations work really well outside of Israel in many, many places. Some places you would never know that they are actually there because we're there in very many different places. You can imagine it's a very sensitive place in sharing the gospel in the Muslim world today. But you have many, many people who are very committed and very deep in and very effective in sharing the gospel. And many movements that are really right up under, a lot of things going on with dreams and visions in many, many places. And interesting so, there's a number of Jewish people that have the Arab and Muslim peoples on their heart, and you see them moving into different places. Sometimes nobody ever knows that they are really Israeli or they're really Jewish, and they're there, but they don't make a lot of their name. They make a lot of the name of Jesus. And so it's a very amazing thing that we're seeing across the Middle East. We've seen one of the few Druze believers sharing the gospel with Jews, and we've seen Jewish believers sharing the gospel with Muslims, and former Muslim believers sharing the gospel with Bedouin. Because when the gospel goes in and it transforms heart, it brings a love that's so supernatural that it sweeps across the land.
Amen. Good. There is, by the way, tonight, one of our testimonies, you're going to hear from Michael, and you're also going to hear from a man named Hormoz Shariat, who is a former Iranian Muslim and has, would you say, the largest ministry in Iran? Yeah. So you hear a wonderful testimony tonight, so that should be an encouragement to you. Someone else.
You were talking about the tension of the people dealing with the rockets coming in and everything like that. How do you work with the children, to keep them from being fearful and in that situation?
How does it work with the children? I think, Israel's a very integrated community because the parents, when they were children, lived through experiences. Your grandparents lived there. The children obviously bear trauma, but for the most part, there's a network and a community that deals in a very healthy way with it. The problem, I think, a lot with post-traumatic stress and dealing with is the isolation. But in Israel, you don't have the isolation. You're in a community that everybody knows what you're going through because they're going through it and coping. Parents know how more or less to keep their cool. And sometimes you have to realize when there's a war situation going on, the husbands are called up to Army Reserve duty, and the wives are left alone, and the families pull together. So one thing in Israel is when there is crisis, the nation pulls together in an incredible way, and nobody is left out or feels alone. And I think that reflects on the children, and I've worked a lot with children and children ministry, and you don't see the children particularly traumatized, but I wouldn't deny that there are problems, but the community pulls together, and it's a very encouraging atmosphere when they do.
When we had, made boxes with the gas mask during the first Gulf War. And we did that with our kids, and they decorated them all up, and we did like the full armor of God and things like that. And just this last year, we found one of the girls that had done that still had her gas mask box from that first Gulf War. So there are things that people do to remind themselves, especially within the believers, of God's faithfulness that He's already had, so we can trust His faithfulness going forward.
But that shows you a little about the surreal element, when you're decorating your gas mask box, as a kid, you realize you're not in Kansas anymore.
I'm not in Kansas anymore either because I just flew down from there yesterday. So, could you speak to a scenario that I've sort of experienced? What happens, or what have you observed when a Palestinian Arab Christian, whether newly or nominal, but they're dealing with a commitment to the gospel, and then there's a crossover between nationalism and the problem of the Christian-Muslim divide? The prime example would be the Temple Mount. If the Palestinian Islamic agenda is that this is to be Palestine, what about the Christian Arab? Might identify with it in nationalistic Palestinian terms, but they're, in a sense, then adopting a Muslim agenda, even though it's a Palestinian national issue.
Well, let me speak to it in the sense that over the last 5 years of doing these retreats, but then all the other times of going and spending time with Arab pastors before I was a citizen, and now I have to meet them in Jerusalem or other places. But one of the things I've learned and have been encouraged by is there really is a wide spectrum of thought. You can't just say that's the Palestinian view or the Palestinian Christian view or the Palestinian evangelical view. There's a lot of views. I see, and I hear from my other brothers as I try to cross-check my observations, which are admittedly more new, but I see a lot of progress in the softening, not of people's theological or geopolitical beliefs and convictions, but of a softening towards wanting to work in unity. In John 17, unity. In John 13, love. They will know you are my disciples because of your love for one another. I see real progress in that. I see some standouts, both in the Messianic community and, honestly, in the Palestinian evangelical community, who are much more, strident, much less willing to just sort of say, listen, we disagree on these issues, but let's focus on the gospel. Let's be encouraging to one another. I also see a divide in the Palestinians between, I see a growing fatigue among Palestinian evangelical pastors, wives, and ministry leaders with their brothers and sisters who are believers, who are so strident, who cannot let. It's not that they don't think this is important, but they are beginning to make a distinction over, A, what impact do we really have on these issues? And B, isn't our main calling to share the gospel, teach the scriptures, and if politics is if we're getting wrapped around the axle of politics all the time, then we are going to weaken our testimony as we can here in the United States. If churches are only preaching politics from the pulpit, I'm not saying there aren't issues, but I'm just, our voice is a prophetic voice to teach the Word of God. No one else is going to do it. The government's not going to do it, and the political activists aren't going to do it. So if we don't do it and live it, we're going to have a problem. And so I think that's a maturing in the Palestinian side, and I would say among the Messianics. But I will say the one thing: those who are the most strident, in my observation, have an anxiety, a fear that the other side somehow their views are going to sweep. And so I think it comes from deep anxieties about, let's say on the Messianic side, if we see a Palestinian having a conference or what have you, and they're just like all over the politics and being extra strident, we fear that the church worldwide is suddenly going to gravitate towards them, and our view will be lost. And I think we have to, I think mostly people do, but I think we need to do more to find that John 17 unity, John 13 love, and have the trust of the sovereignty of God. Honestly, Israel came into existence without the church really getting it. The church doesn't mostly get it now, and honestly, I don't think it mostly will, though we will do our best to try to help them understand it. But this is not thwarting God's plan, but we're going to try to help the church figure it out the best we can and be engaged in a positive impact for the gospel. I hope that's a helpful explanation.
It didn't quite answer the question. I'm sympathetic to the idea that the Palestinian Arab Christian, because in a sense of Palestinian nationalism, would lean towards that need to be met, but then at times might cross over the line of actually adopting a mutual Arab concern that's Palestinian, but defined as an Islamic agenda, like the Temple.
Yeah, okay, and I'm saying that, yes, sometimes that happens. But I'm saying my observation just over the last 5 or 6 years is that I think people are making sure that they're not following a political or an Islamist view, and I think they're being more careful about it.
But if I could say, the Palestinian evangelicals are really between a rock and a hard place. This is a very narrow community, and very geographically, there's no space. And they're trying to speak to their people, the Palestinians, and they're sympathizing with it as co-citizens, having a call to the gospel, being surrounded by Muslims with an agenda. And, it's an unenviable position, and certainly in need of prayer for the evangelicals. I think we, as Joel said, need to be striving for unity and realizing that these are brothers and sisters under duress. And because the Palestinian, it's not a state, it's an authority, and the structure isn't even there. And,
we're much better off as Messianic believers with, in freedom and in the space to make these decisions than our brothers. And our numbers are bigger, too.
Good. Well, how about giving them a round of applause to show your appreciation?